So, good morning, everyone. Everyone in the room, thanks for coming. And good morning to everyone online as well. Thank you for joining. I think we have upwards of 50 or more joining us online today, which is really exciting. So that means we can take the venue to the wider benefit to the country, which is great. So, really warm welcome to what is the very first NHS Estates Fire Safety Forum, first of this year, but the first ever as well. And we're really grateful as hosts at SDS, Specialist Door Solutions, to be able to offer our venue to host this important forum to talk about all of the changes that are going on in our sphere, and to be able to, obviously, we have an interest in the fire safety world ourselves, a great interest in this part of we're manufacturers of fire doors. So I'm just going to give you a really brief update from me as to where my position is at Specialist Door Solutions. And then I'm going to introduce our panel who we have here, and it's all over to them. It's all about the panel today. It's not about me, but obviously in a background sense, we are as interested as you are. And I acknowledge the persons that we've got in attendance today, yourselves and those online, being really key persons in fire safety consultancy, fire officers, state officer roles, the persons that are actually at the brunt of what we're talking about today, the persons who are delivering and practicing the legislation that Maz and his team at NHS are working on and rolling out. So just really briefly, Specialist Door Solutions are one of the UK's leading designers and manufacturers of specialist door sets, and we focus specifically on healthcare. Many of you, we know many of you, we work together in your hospitals, on your projects, and we're keen to work more. We are very much, as a manufacturer, recognise the constant change and the constant development of the track that we're on in terms of fire safety, how we need to comply more than ever before, and what that might look like for us practically. So we have a 40-year record of manufacture, which is great, and I'm really proud to come from a family that's been going that long, and to say, those 40 years of experience are putting us in a position today to be able to lead the charge this sector on fire safety. I tell you, I think I'll have a go. IT isn't my strong point. I might let you just change the slide, Nathan. Is that okay? Cool. Yeah. So we work closely. I do personally, I have done for many years, work closely with architects and hospital contractors, making sure we deliver specifications that fit the purpose. So we make all of our own door sets ourselves, which is a fantastic thing for me to be able to say when I'm out in front of a person such as you. That gives us the knowledge of our product inside out that others don't necessarily have. It means that we have to be more responsible than others because we are making those door sets from scratch. Now, every single component part of that door is key in coming together to make that safe product for you to install into your estates and to be used and to be fit for purpose going on. Our main factory is in Hampshire. Some of you have come and had a visit, and we would welcome more, and we welcome those that have been to come again. It's a fantastic way for you to engage in the product and to see what actually goes into making a fire-resistant door set, and what goes into making a product that's of a quality that will deliver for you and enable you to have safety in your buildings going forward. One of the obvious benefits of that is it means we're able to react very quickly to the industry changes, because we can physically go down to our floor and we can talk with the technical team. We can work hands-on in developing that product to make it the very most up-to-date, the most specific, most compliant product ever. And we do pride ourselves in a specialist product. Nathan, sorry, next slide, I think. Okay, so before I go onto the specifics of the product and how that helps us in what we're talking about today, outcomes we aim to deliver for NHS Trust. So spaces that are aesthetically pleasing and that enhance wellness. Today's interesting headline in the BBC, we've seen many of them recently, and I'm sure we'll see more yet until we get to the end of this. If we ever do get to the end of it, about patients dying in corridors. We do love a headline, but sadly, it's a state that the NHS facilities we have where some of these things are true. Persons are dying in corridors where they don't have access to the key life-saving equipment. That's further back into the hospital. Had the experience myself spending New Year's Eve at Royal Surrey in a corridor, and what an experience that was. I can tell you firsthand. I feel like the Queen did in the Blitz. Now I feel like I can look persons in the eye and say, and you know what? Fantastic staff is the overriding impression you get. However, very, very limited facilities. You're in a drafty corridor where you are for 5 or 6 hours. You're surrounded by all walks of life. I'll leave it to that. And it's not conducive to wellness. So our product is all about wellness, helping to achieve an area that will maintain through its robustness and ability to kind of perform. So we're very much focused on reducibility downtime. We know what it is to you. When a door goes out of action, we know what that means in a hospital. So that hour or 6 spent in a corridor, if an area is out of action because of a door being out of use or non-compliant, all of a sudden that lack of space means a huge amount in terms of the numbers of patients that we get through. We recognise that, and we're working actively to help you on products that will prevent that in our sphere, in the door sphere. Assured safety and regulatory compliance, of course, that's what we're going to be all about today. The necessity for you, I've had it said to me recently, sometimes in life, the way we're going now, the piece of paper, the certificate that comes with the product you use is going to be more important than the product itself, which is an interesting thing. I can see exactly where we're going there. We know firsthand from the sphere in which we work, the increasingly tight regulations, and we totally agree with that as well. Obviously, post-Grenfell, the focus has been hugely on safety and compliance. And we're finding it, we're up against competitors. Of course, we are in a commercial space, and we're often up against that old thing of they're cheaper than you. And when you start scratching beneath the surface, it's a very interesting field. We know what it is, what it costs, what it takes to deliver that full, robust, watertight certification. And like I said, it's a moving feast. We'll get onto that later. And then, of course, in our aim of life, indoors, our aim is to give you a door that will work, function that's robust, that will ultimately mean fewer replacements and repairs. That's less downtime, that's less cost. That old thing about buying right in the first place and not spending going forward, I can demonstrate it to I'm blue in the face. I've done a whole study on it, and I've been working with a new hospital programme, working with architects, demonstrating how you specify the right product. Again, more on that later. We have Stephen from NHS Architects today who'll tell you about the importance of specification. And then finally, the seamless project execution and timelines, the need for us to be able to work with the contractors and delivery of that right product once we've got to that stage. We can demonstrate how we can do all of that for you. So lastly, just really quickly on the product itself, we specialise in post-form door sets, which many of you have. I'm looking at you, gentleman from Epsom. Many years I've been to Epsom hospitals and enjoyed the environment of the place. Maybe that's stretching it slightly. But we absolutely know the number of persons you get with the hospital is great. It's a hugely populated area, but you've always had a good appreciation of post-form door sets. Sorry, that's how weird I am. I'm very focused on doors, you can imagine. But a post-form door set is a door set for protective, and I can take you to case studies across the country of areas where we supplied doors 10, 12, 15, 20 years ago, and today they're still there. Their edge is still compliant and still retains that compliance that you need going forward. So I consistently preach the quality of specifying the right quality product, and that's certainly what we're all focused on at SDS. We're very much focused on supplying the robust product. So I think for me, that's us, that brief intro. I'm now going to move straight to the panel. I'm going to introduce each of the four individually, and then we are going to move back to them for their own slides, which they're going to talk about, and then we're going to really open up to questions, which is where we are, because everyone on the panel, everyone online, everyone in the room, it's that kind of working forum we want to kind of engender today, and the questioning and the kind of help that comes from open public questions. So, first of all, Mark Wimble, Inspecting Officer and Healthcare Coordinator from London Fire Brigade. This is Mark. Mark, I'm going to come back to him in a second, and he's going to introduce himself and what he does. So you can imagine we're going here. London Fire Brigade are inspecting, they are the inspecting body. We're going to then move, I believe, to Alan, no, going down, sorry, down the list, not across, sorry. So we're going to move to Maz Dode, who's the Head of Fire Safety from NHS England. Now, of course, Maz in his role is one of the key persons setting the regulations that we abide by to ensure safety going forward in terms of compliance and ongoing inspection to retain compliance. We're then going to move to Alan Oliver, who's a Director from Golden Thread Fire Delay. Alan is from a company that, again, acts for the Hospital Trust in inspecting and installing and ensuring safety in door sets and other fire-related products in the NHS estates. And then we've got Stephen Hatcher here, Associate Director from PNHS Architects, who's come down from Leeds last night. He is going to speak to us about the importance of the knowledge regulation at the beginning when we're designing the projects and the specification of the right product to meet that. So I think without any further ado, if we go straight into the first slides, we've got Mark, your slides first. I'm going to hand over to Mark to introduce himself and talk through the slide. Mark.
Thanks very much. Mark Wimble, I'm a healthcare coordinator and inspecting officer for London Fire Brigade. I'll give you a sort of brief background as to what I do, what the rest of my team does that I work with. So I'm the healthcare coordinator, and I look after a group of inspecting officers who go out. They're amazing people. They go out and audit all different types of premises that fall under the fire safety order, but they also hold a specialism in healthcare or hospitals. So they've got an awful lot of work on their hands, and coming around to a hospital, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a very sort of in-depth and complex environment. So they have to put aside a good chunk of time to be able to come around and do a fire safety audit in a hospital. So they do a really good job of managing that. So we enforce the fire safety order through the guidance, which is primarily the HCM documents, which Maz and his team put together. We are currently trying to re-establish and rebuild our healthcare team at the moment. We lost a lot of our competent members of staff a while back, and we're just working now on trying to get back that competency. It's taken a little while. It's going to be a long journey, but we've made a start, and we're doing really well on sort of working towards getting a really well-established healthcare team back again. One of our long-term aims is to try and get 1 or 2 inspecting officers assigned to each NHS London trust. Again, we've made a start on that. A few of the hospitals around have got either 1 or 2 inspecting officers attached to them. I know there's quite a few that are still waiting for that. But as our inspecting officers are going through their training and their development, they will then come up to the point where we can start assigning them to a few more of the trusts. We'll go around and we'll inspect or audit hospitals. So the ones that have been assigned to a trust will be say dedicated, or will work especially with the hospitals within that trust. The reason we try and do that is just to provide a little bit of consistency and to provide a little bit of or to build and provide a relationship with the fire safety team there as well. What we want to try and avoid is having too many different people coming in with their own ways of auditing, not fully understanding the hospitals and the projects and the way that they work. So we want to try and provide a bit of consistency with having the same 1 or 2 members of staff going to that hospital, building up the relationship, knowing what all the projects are, what phases they're in, and that will make for a bit more of a consistent audit. It also gives the trust a familiar face as well if they need any help or support or advice. We've got a healthcare mailbox, which I've listed at the bottom there, healthcare at london-fire.gov.uk. That comes through primarily to me. There's a few of us that manage that mailbox, and then anything that comes in there, either I can deal with or I can pass it over to our healthcare inspecting officers who can deal with that there as well. We try and have a risk-based approach to our hospital audit, so we don't want to come in too heavy-handed. Today we're here talking about fire doors, so I appreciate not every single fire door is going to be fully compliant in all of the hospitals. The amount of wear and tear and damage and usage of the fire doors means that they're going to be in a state of disrepair. They're going to need inspecting, they're going to need repairs. So we fully understand that, but we try and have a look at the risk that is involved with those doors, and I believe Maz or Alan may touch on that later with the risk matrix and stuff. So we try and make sure, instead of just blindly following the HCM documents, our inspecting officers will come around and they'll have a look and they'll say, okay, that fire door isn't compliant. What's behind it? What's in front of it? How often is it being used? What's it being used for? And then we can score our audits accordingly. In terms of fire doors, as part of our audit, our fire safety audit, we're going to be looking for reporting processes, management and maintenance of the doors. So again, I think some of the other panelists will touch on this a little bit more in their presentations, but we'll be looking for documentation, that golden thread of information. When you get a fire door or a set of fire doors, we want to know that you've got some of that documentation, that certification stating that they're appropriate for their use. I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to go on too much, but thank you for having me today, and I'll take any questions later. Thank you, Mark.
Apologies, I think it's very clear. Thanks, Mark, very much. You've touched on questions. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure you will, and we actively encourage that as well. That's how we're going to learn together, that's how we're going to work, and that's online or in the room. If you could hold them to the end, we're going to have a question and answer session, and we've got the ability to take questions from our online team as well. So please do make a note. So yes, thank you very much, Mark. Interesting. We'll come back to those points. So I think next up is Maz Dude, head of NHS England Fire. Maz, all yours.
Yeah, Maz Dowd, as it says, as he said, head of fire safety for NHS England. So what's the role of NHS England? What's it about? The fire brigade enforce the legislation with the CQC as well, but primarily the fire brigade. And what does NHS England do? NHS England provides leadership for the NHS guidance. So we write guidance, which is the guidance is to the legislation. So the legislation is primarily the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. And the guidance is written in the form of health technical memorandums in the 05 series. And there's a whole suite of them in there. And I think if we go on to the next slide, the one I'm going to be talking about primarily is HTM 0503 Part K. Part K is on fire safety risk assessments. It was recently revised, as recently as within the last 12 months, and there are a number of changes in there, which I will go into some of those now. Mark mentioned about fire doors and the risk-based approach, and that's very much something which we've brought on board here. It depends on the risk, whether or not a fire door is suitable, not necessarily whether it's got a ticket saying this is a 30-minute fire door and it's tested for 30 minutes. That is what you would expect when installing a new door. But if you've got a large hospital, there's probably going to be somewhere between probably about 4,000 or 5,000 doors, maybe more in a large hospital. Some of those will have been there for a long time. Some of them won't have bits of paper saying that this was a fire door. So how do you know if it's a fire door? So we've included more comprehensive guidance on assessing and maintaining fire doors, and we've outlined the different options for existing fire doors that might not meet current standard, such as accepting something called a notional fire door. So what's a notional fire rated door? You go and check the fire, or Mark's team will come along and check the fire doors, and they'll be looking for certain things that might indicate that they're fire doors. Those are the thickness of the door. Typically a 30-minute door would be 44 mil thick. I've seen some that are thinner with tickets on them. They'd look for that first. They'd look, how many hinges has it got? Has it got incandescent strips? Has it got cold smoke seals? Has it got a self-closer if it's not a fire door kept locked shut? Does everything on there in terms of the hardware seem to comply with what should be there? Are the gaps reasonable? Does it close at a reasonable rate? Once they've assessed all of those things, then if that door ticks all of those boxes, then you can be reasonably confident that it was installed as a fire door and it's going to be fit for purpose to a certain extent. Whether or not it's fit for purpose in that particular location depends on the location and the risk in that location. For instance, fire doors fitted to, let's say, a mortuary will have a very different risk profile than those fitted to an intensive treatment unit or hospital theatres. So what may be acceptable in one location may not be acceptable in another. And that's one of the things we've been trying to get across with the guidance with 80503 Part K. Now, it does depend very much on the competency of the person that's doing that risk assessment. They need to be competent and confident in their own understanding to be able to say, yes, this fire door in this location is suitable for the risk. Or they might say it's not suitable in this location. It's not a straightforward science, sadly. So then we're also accepting doors which might be, so it says professionally assessed as likely to perform adequately. And we're also accepting, well, if you need to upgrade them with new strips or seals, that might be okay, depending on, again, the risk posed in that location and the state, the state of the door as well. The next line is probably, I've already covered it. So what you're assessing against was, I'll stop there.
Another slide.
Oh no, that's it. So the last one, maintenance. What about maintenance? How often should you check a fire door and what standard are you checking it to? Those are the two main things. Now, Alan's done a lot of work on that, and Alan's book is referenced in the HTM. He's done it in conjunction with NAFO, National Association of Healthcare Fire Officers. So it has that status, and we do refer to that book. You might find, for instance, a door that the three main things you're looking at are the criticality of that area, which can be based on the patient dependency. The usage of the door, how often is it used? For instance, a main entrance door to a ward or theatres, for instance, might be used very frequently, whereas one to an electrical riser might be used very infrequently. Is it reasonable to check them on the same basis? Probably not. And then the third factor is how likely are they to suffer impact damage? And again, cross-corridor doors that aren't on hold-open devices or doors to hospital theatres tend to get a lot of abuse, whereas some other doors do not. So again, those are the three main factors that one would consider. And I think that's come to the end of the introduction. So we put a lot into HCMO 503 Part K. It's a relatively new document, and please do look at it, especially with reference to fire doors. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That's really useful, and it's really interesting to hear from one of the persons who's setting this setting that we have to abide by. And we'll return to that with questions shortly. So I think we're going to start seeing this theme developing of where we're going. We've had the inspection side from Mark. We've had the regulation side from Maz. We're now going to move to Alan, who Maz already referred to, who is from Golden for Fire Delay and has written a very comprehensive book, which he's going to share with you on how we can comply with this legislation. So, Alan Oliver, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Russell. And thank you to SDS for hosting today's event. I think most of you know about the reference document, and thank you, Maz, for having introduced it. First of all, I'm delighted that, in addition to myself, there's three other people in the room who wrote the original paper on how to inspect fire doors in hospitals, and then helped to create a reference document. So in the audience, well, there's obviously myself and Maz, and there's also Nick from Nigel Williams. So it's great that you're here to join us today. This was we started to write the paper in 2019. We created the reference document in 2021. We then created a second edition in 2022. Believe it or not, we've printed 2,500 of these so far. They've been very well received. We're trying to get them out as much as we can, and obviously there is also electronic versions of this. And it's all very well writing a paper and then creating a reference document, but we've got to make people aware of it. And I think special thanks to my colleague Sen for having agreed to sponsor this. I mean, to create 2,500 of these, and by the way, we give them away freely. And if anyone online hasn't got them yet, please contact us via SDS, and we'd be pleased to present them to provide them to you. And then 2 years ago, I was approached by Women for Housing, and they said, would it be okay? Could you help us to adapt the reference document to the residential version, which we did, and we've printed quite a lot of those as well, and that's been very well received. And then at the same time, NAFO, the National Association of Healthcare Fire Officers, decided to create another working group to write a paper on how to inspect fire dampers, fire stopping and cavity barriers. And I'm also delighted that we've got two other members from the working group for this one, here today. We've got Robert Blake and we've got Lee Harvey. So, and we've got other people who've given all of these documents a really robust peer review, such as Jason Thompson, who's here today. So, in addition to these, I'm now working on generic versions of both documents and university and college versions of both documents. So that's the great thing. But I think two main points here. If you can just change the slide. The first point is that all these documents say something really simple and very easy to understand. When we were writing the paper, when we were researching it, we decided to recommend that there should be 3 ways to inspect fire doors in hospitals, in residential buildings, in universities and colleges, and lots of other buildings. You need a type 1 inspection for new doors, because you want to make absolutely sure that it's been installed as per fire door test evidence and the manufacturer's details. On your existing notional doors, without a golden thread of information, you need to make sure, as Maz said, to assess whether they're suitable for their location, something that's never been done before, potentially. And if they have got the potential for their location, do they need to be remediated to a certain standard? And there's a situation where you can actually potentially certify some of those doors, maybe for the first time. So you've turned them from notional doors to certified doors that are suitable and sufficient for their location, which meets the requirements of the fire safety order. How can you not assess what a 30-year-old door is in terms of whether it's suitable for its location? That is a legal requirement. So that's a type 1 and a type 2 inspection, which you only ever have to do once. And you only have to do one or the other, depending on whether it's a new door or an existing door. And then you then have to have functional ongoing inspection, which is your type 3. So, I'm very passionate about the fact that people need to be understanding the need to be carrying out, potentially, in a very large hospital with thousands of doors, 3 types of inspections. I speak to a lot of people. I try and bang the drum. I try and make people aware of this document. The fact that we've printed 2,500 reference documents, and believe me, they're not all in our office in Brentford. I can tell you that we are getting the message about. But clearly, I think this was a groundbreaking document, and I think people need to fully appreciate. I think this was not only was the first ever document on how to create standardised systems for inspecting fire doors in hospitals. I think this was the first time it's put in print that you need 3 different inspections. And I've spoken to an awful lot of people over the last 5 years about these documents and the need for 3 inspections. And I can tell you, not one person has told me they disagree with me. Not one person has said, this is a load of rhubarb. What people have said is it's not easy to do it. It's not easy to implement it. And by the way, this applies to fire dampers, fire stopping and cavity branders as well. You need 3 types of inspections. You need a robust inspection of new stuff. You need to assess what you've got for something that might have been there 20, 30 years. Is it a fire damper that's also a smoke damper in a critical location, that sort of stuff. And then once you've done a type 1 and type 2, you do the functional inspections. So that's the first point I want to make. It's very simple to understand what these documents entail. So my second point, which is far more important, is that I've not yet had one single trust in the country who's told me they're fully implementing everything in these reference documents, and they've got fire door protocols in place that fully ensure that this is being fundamentally managed in line with the Fire Safety Order and the Building Safety Act, which says that you've got to have competent people doing your work, because we all know that an awful lot of work 7 years after Grenfell Tower is on an industrial scale going into hospitals, and it's not compliant. And you could say compliant with what, but that's another story, because as Maz says, you can risk manage doors. You don't have to have them all as fire testing. That's why we can look at notional doors and potentially certify them, all they've got to do is comply with the fire safety order, and then everybody's happy and everybody's safe. And I think everyone in the supply chain, has got to play a part in that. I thank SDS because I know that they bang the drum about the fact that their fire doors are only as good as how well people install them. People need to install them competently. I'm sure that there's people in architecture and the specification side who've got a role to play too. So I'll hand over now to Stephen, and thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you, Alan. And I'd like to make a note of applauding Alan for his personal dedication, time that he's put into that document, and of course many others that you've referenced as well. It's a non-biased, practical document there to help us implement safety in the way we expect and maintain our doors going forward and other areas, of course. And my mathematics aren't great, but I picked up 2,500 copies. And I think that means if we divvy that out for every NHS trust, it's over 100 copies per trust. So let's hope that's where they are, 100 in each trust at least. So, Stephen, I'm going to hand over to Stephen Hatcher from NHS Architects, who are an architect practice who are hugely involved in healthcare in the UK, and they have been for many years and growing, and are leaders of their profession. And he's going to talk to us about the importance of specifying the right product in the first place to be able to help us to deliver what else we've been discussing this morning. So, Stephen, all yours.
Thank you, Russell. Good morning, everybody, and morning to the people online as well. Thank you very much for having us. So a little bit about ourselves. We, as you can probably tell from my accent, we're based primarily in the North East. We have an office in the North West as well, but we do work nationally. A lot of our projects, around about 65%, is in the healthcare sector. That's primarily for the NHS, but we do also work for private clients as well, and also for primary care centres and the like. We've delivered over £500 million worth of projects for the NHS in the past 41 nearly years, and we've got a large team with significant experience. I can't claim we've got anybody left who's been here since the start of the project, start of practice now, so we haven't got that 40 years experience continuous, but there's an awful lot of us have been there a lot longer than 20 years now, so we do have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience delivering NHS projects. We have contributed to some NHS guidance as well, such as HBN 11. And as I say, I'm not going to go through all of the details on this because it's probably not really what you're here for, but it was just to show that we do work across a large spectrum of different types of projects for healthcare. We don't just do the nice shiny new buildings like you saw on that first slide. We get involved in single room refurbishments, equipment replacements, looking at some of the infrastructure, energy centres and the like. So we understand that, particularly when we're talking about doors, they have a lot of different functions to fulfil, get the teeth back in. One of the common themes across all of that is fire safety, of course. But when we're looking at doors, when we're specifying doors, we also think about other things, protection for patients and staff, not just in terms of fire, but are we looking at a lead line door for X-ray protection? We're looking for laser protection. Of course, architects, we're interested in finishes. We want something that looks nice and aesthetically pleasing as well. I've heard a few people mention durability. That's obviously a massive thing because we know that porters like to use the doors as target practice. They get a lot of abuse. So particularly when we're looking at the refurbishment schemes, we're going in and we are looking at the quality of the doors or the sort of the state that the doors are in. Actually, can we retain them? Are they suitable to be used for the purposes they're for, or do we need to consider replacing them? Next slide, please. Yeah, so just very briefly, we're over 100 staff now. As I say, we've got 4 offices, delivered over £500 million of projects for the NHS, and we've got a very good design and technical capability. We pride ourselves on taking complex projects from delivery through to completion. We're not just focused on the front end and doing the nice shiny projects. We will literally do anything that we feel will help improve the service the NHS can offer and help improve the patient experience as well. Very much for listening to me.
Stephen, that's really useful. I can pay tribute to the fact that PNHS as a practice are easy to work with. I have a particular soft spot for them because my first significant order when I joined SDS 14 years ago was at the Queen Victoria Hospital Theatre block in East Grinstead. So I don't know if anyone's here from that hospital there, but I understand they're still going strong. And of course, Princess Emily opened up a lovely photo. It was all great, a great story. So thank you, everyone. I think, first of all, I love the principle of what's happened today. We've got persons from every aspect of this. We've got the inspectors, we've got the designers, we've got the regulation makers, we've got the persons that are using the sites. A word that came up at IHEAM last year, big healthcare states event, I guess you all know about IHEAM, was the word collaboration. And that's what we're seeing today. The different parties coming together to work together. It's not all about, here's the rules, you abide by them. It's persons listening, taking it in, adjusting it, working on it as we move. We're in a constantly moving field, and we've all had to recognise that. If we look back to Grenfell, the amount that's changed since then. And I think surely the best way, and what we're doing today, is working together to develop it and make it work, because that's what it's all about. It's making things work. Ultimately, we're all responsible for patient safety, which is saving lives. And that's what we try and train our team and SDS. Everything we do is about saving lives, ultimately. So I think what we'd like to do now, I've got a few questions that have come in already to kind of prompt some discussion, but this is where we want you all to get involved, and online, you're at no disadvantage. Do send them through and Nathan will manage your questions and points. So I think the first point I've got here, I'm going to come to you, Matt, if that's okay. A couple of points, Matt. So what does compliance mean, and what is, and I'm going to ask you to open this up because I can't, ALARP, and how is it significant?
Okay. The two are to some extent, the two questions are to some extent intertwined. What does compliance mean? The only thing you really have to comply with is the legislation. So that's the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. Most of the articles within that order are prefaced with, where necessary in order to safeguard the safety of relevant persons. So what fire door do you need? How long does it need to last? And so on and so forth. Will be subject to that little bit of, what do we need here to safeguard the safety of relevant persons? So that's the first thing I'll mention. Still on the subject of compliance, if you're installing a new set of doors, a new whole door set with frame, you want to make sure that that complies with current standards, which are usually in the form of British standards or European standards, both on the manufacture and also on the installation of those doors, because good doors installed badly are not going to be effective. So compliance means two things depending on what you're looking at. If you're looking at an existing set of doors, the first thing you're going to say is, okay, does that comply with the fire safety order when necessary in order to safeguard the safety of relevant persons? Is that doing that job? And as I mentioned earlier on, you need to have a reasonably in-depth understanding of that location, which is why I'm not particularly keen on people who go around and just inspect fire doors and they come back with, we've checked it. One hospital, which was about 20 years old, I had the fire door survey report, came back and, yeah, we failed 80% of your doors. Okay, so what does that mean? What's the risk posed to people, to relevant people, by the failures of those doors? And in some cases, there would have been no risk posed to them. In other cases, there might have been a considerable risk. So what does compliance mean? Compliance, ultimately, you have to comply with the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. If you're installing new doors, then really you need to have compliance with British or European or other standards which the door manufacturers will comply with, both on the manufacturer and the installation. And the installation, you're probably looking at a third-party accredited scheme where people are certified for installation. And what does ALARP mean? Well, if you're looking at a fire door, ALARP means to reduce the risk to as low as reasonably practicable. And again, what's reasonable will depend on the risk to persons and the risk in that particular area. So if you've got a particularly high fire load, you're going to get a rapidly developing fire, and that fire door is protecting an escape route, then you want a really good door there that's going to last for the period of time prescribed. On the other hand, it's not so critical. It's not, everyone can get out without going past that area. The fire loading is less, the fire is going to develop less quickly. Then you might well accept a lower standard in that location. How you get to that, as I said earlier, I think it's the job of the person doing the fire risk assessment primarily, and we have included that in Part K. That's what they need to do. They need to look at the risk, assess the risk, and then decide what level of standard goes with that. With new doors, as Alan said, well, we've got three types of inspection. Alan's got three types of inspection in his book. The first one, you put a new door in, it needs to comply with a known standard. You get the certificate, which Russell said is the one thing that people look at. But just because you've got a certificate for a door doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do the job. Was it installed to the correct standard? You might have another certificate then from the door installer saying, yes, we are UCAS accredited under a third-party scheme, and we can certify this installation. Even so, you still need to physically check some of those doors, ideally all of them at the installation stage. The type 2 inspection is you've got existing doors, they've not been checked for some time, are they fit for purpose? Once you've done the type 2 inspection, there's no real need to redo that the next time, because you've done it once, you can go on to the type 3 inspection. One of my favourite topics is the threshold gaps at the bottom of the door. According to most standards, that shouldn't exceed 3 millimetres. You try and thank you, Alan. Alan has to go, and he's going to take this.
And that's the matrix that Maz actually created to describe this point.
So, yeah, one of my favourite points is, well, the threshold gap at the bottom of the doors is usually a maximum of 3 millimetres, and that's to prevent cold smoke spread. It's not to stop the fire getting out. Normally, most fire doors are tested up to a 10 mil gap at the bottom when they're tested for to stop a fire. But the smoke, well, that'll get under a much smaller gap. So again, well, how do you know if that gap of 4 mil or 5 mil is okay? Because it's going to cost a lot of money to lift the bottom of the door, take it off, and you might find that the floor's uneven, so you can't even do that. And then you've got to fit a drop-down door seal, and then that costs more money, and then that's going to be maintained. So where does that come within a lot? And as Alan said, we have got in his book, there's a lovely little matrix which depends on the room size, the dependency of the patients, and other factors which are all in there. And that says, yeah, you might well accept a gap that's bigger than 3 mil in this situation. I personally applied this in hospitals. It works. It's worked when I've applied it, and you get a safe situation, but you're still within that as low as reasonably practicable. But again, it does take someone with the knowledge and the expertise to be able to confidently go in and say, right, I'm assessing it against these standards. This is what I'm using. And then, right, it's not a case of, okay, we check that door, it's okay. You need to write these things down. So we've used this table. We've seen that the door cap at the bottom is this size. That's acceptable or that's not acceptable. And once you've got that down, then that should hold stead at further inspections as well.
No, thank you. That's brilliant. That's good. I wonder if we have questions for Matt specifically. It would be a good chance to take those now. So anyone on the floor, or Nathan, if you've got anyone coming in with questions, Naz is a very good person to be asking your practical questions of, as he set the rules for you. So at the back, sorry, I've got the names.
It's Mark, exercise. Matt, it's just a quick question. Obviously, this is going to be deemed best practice, and we in the trusts are engaging with it and taking on board. Are we engaging with other partners now, such as property services, the PFIs, TFM contractors, surveyors, or fire doors? What's the process of making them aware of all this?
It's in the HTM now, so we put a reference to this book in HTM 0503 Part K, which is what they should be using when they're doing this work. So that's it's there. We have advertised it. I've done talks around saying this is what you should be using. So I think it's reasonably well received out there. Interestingly enough, I haven't as yet had any adverse comments. I've asked for some clarification on a few points, but I've never had anyone come back and say, you know, we don't agree with this, or we think it doesn't work. So it seems to be well received out there, but it's quite difficult to put into practice. One of the hospitals I worked at a few years ago, we went along the lines of, well, we'll do a type for existing doors, we'll do a type 2 inspection on every door, and during that inspection, we will give it a rating, and depending on that rating, then we will vary the frequency of the re-inspection of that door. And it took a long time. And then to put that into place, well, you've got, your inspector might, or your risk assessor might walk into a ward and there might be 20 doors in there, and he's only got to check 3 of them on this occasion, and then 3 months later he might have to check 6, and a year later he might have to check all of them. So that took a long time getting that onto the CAFM system, so that it could be, it could be generated and they could go out and do that. It took one guy, so a smallish county hospital, I think it took one guy who was quite good on this. It took him about 2 weeks to do that.
Yeah, the concern for us, we've got quite a few properties that come under NHS property services. They've got dual responsibilities, responsible persons. And obviously we want to make sure that they will be following the same practice that we do in the acute trust.
So yeah, the Part K will apply. Well, Part K is for complex healthcare premises. So some of those will not be complex healthcare premises, and some of them are. So the ones which are complex will be covered. The ones that aren't, the principle's still there. Alan's book covers all of them. I would say they do need to use that.
Not so much a question.
So Lee Harvey.
Lee Harvey, just a roving consultant, specialising in healthcare.
No, I just trying to pick up the names that they're online can hear.
Yeah, many years spent at Whitespace. But just more of a statement, I think is worthy of mention. I don't think Alan mentioned was that it isn't, the guidance is endorsed by the NFCC, which I think endorses some guidance that works within the spirit of the RRO, which is risk-based. So I think that gives it a lot of gravitas as well. So I just thought that was worth.
That's the National Fire Chiefs Council for those that aren't familiar.
And the RRO.
The Regulatory Reform Order, which is
Yeah.
the one piece of legislation that we want to.
Excellent. And Lee, obviously, I know you've contributed to Alan's book.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And like I said, I came back to it being a practical and non-biased document. It's been adopted in the HTM or referenced in the HTM, which proves its use to those of us on the ground in delivering it. So, Nathan, any questions online?
Yeah, so we've got one for, I don't know if it's specifically for Maz, but it can be covered as part of this. But so Martin Corbett's asked, Part K now requires primary and secondary risk assessments. Hospitals are playing catch up to undertake primary risk assessments, which means under the RRO, they may not currently have suitable and sufficient risk assessment in place. Will there be any allowance made when fire services undertake audits, whilst hospitals put systems in place and undertake primary risk assessment?
I'll answer that in part, then I'll pass over to Mark because it's more akin to him. All parts of the hospital should have been covered by a fire risk assessment previously. So although now you have to do a primary and secondary, the primary fire risk assessment will cover the whole building, things that are common to the whole building, like the fire alarm system, the external walls if they need a further assessment, and the common parts. So they should have all been covered anyway. So really, it's just a case of transferring that information onto one appendix to the HCM if you're using that appendix. I will pass over to Mark to answer the bit about the enforcement.
Yeah, so in terms of the enforcement of it, I understand it's going to take a little bit of time to catch up with new guidance documents and review guidance. We have, when we go around and we do our fire safety audits, we take a snapshot of what we see at the time, and that's how we score the audit. So if a particular hospital doesn't have a primary and secondary fire risk assessment at the time that we go there, that is how we would score it. We'd obviously work with the trust or the hospital and give them some guidance and support with doing that if that's what they need. But we would score it as we saw it on the day, in accordance with the guidance documents, the HTM documents. But yes, we would like to sort of support the hospitals that are out there, and we do understand that it's going to take a little bit of time to get these documents to the level where they need to be, following a review of the documents and the guidance that's out there. But just having an unsuitable fire risk assessment or a fire risk assessment that's not suitable and sufficient may not necessarily result on its own in an enforcement notice. It would probably be in conjunction with a few other deficiencies as well. But if a notice was served, we'd be expecting the hospital to be working in the background to try and get those fire risk assessments, the primary and secondary fire risk assessments, sorted out as that was served.
Thank you. Was there any other questions online? Natalie, the question here.
Questions there? Robert Blake, Kingston Hospital.
Robert Blake, Kingston Hospital. So Robert, your question.
There's also primary and secondary fire risk assessments. And we all know we do risk assessments departmentally, which basically involves a lot of areas internally. My question is, if we expanded the secondary risk assessment to embrace a primary, that doesn't mean we need 2 risk assessments. We could encapsulate everything in each and every departmental risk assessment. So, for instance, the whole description of the building, its fire strategy and everything within one risk assessment included with the departmental. So, in my mind, we're not duplicating things. Because looking at primary and secondary, I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, we've got all this departmental, like 100 fire risk assessments. Oh, now we've got to do another, whatever number of buildings in the trust, individual trust. A primary risk assessment on its own, which encapsulates, like you said, all the common areas, the stairwells and everything. I'm thinking this should all be encapsulated within one risk assessment, but the whole description of the building itself should be in that risk assessment, and then individualize the departmentals as part of that risk assessment in the title.
I'll start off with that. The reason we did a primary and a secondary is there are a number of things which are common to everything. So external walls are common to all of it. The access, the access and egress routes tend to be common as well. Fire alarm tends to be common to the building. So we didn't want everything, we wanted it to capture everything, but we didn't want it repeated in every single fire risk assessment. Hence, the primary and the secondary. If you're doing a ward or let's say a typical ward, in most cases that fire risk assessment would stop at the entrance door to the ward, and it may or may not include the external wall of that ward, probably not. So we wanted to capture the things that are common to everything. So it's primary, it's common. It shouldn't, if anything, it should reduce the amount of repetition that goes into the secondary risk assessments, because you don't have to say, well, the fire alarm in this building is to this standard and it was installed at this time and it's maintained in this way, because that's in the primary. What you might want to cover is, yes, we've got sufficient wall points in this area, they're not obstructed or they are obstructed, so we've got to remove the obstructions from around them. So we were aware that there was a potential for bits to be missed. If you're just doing lots of separate ones and we wanted to get over that, we wanted to include something on the external walls, and that's why we went for primary and secondary. Also, they implemented it in Scotland ahead of England. It seemed to be a pretty good idea when I read through it. Sorry,
Anything to add to that?
I don't think there's very much to add to that. I think the whole idea of the primary fire assessment is just having that more holistic overview of the building. But yeah, I think Maz has covered all of that.
Hello, I'm Nick Strong from Croydon NHS Trust. I was just thinking about what Mark was saying earlier about the audits being put into place and the difficulties for inspecting officers when they come down, trying to find their way around a hospital. It's taken 5 years, work its way around, and how that primary risk assessment could be very useful tool for auditing. All of our bigger risks I put onto a risk register. These are the things that are important, but I haven't got the money in my revenue budget. And then there's a constant battle to persuade sort of senior management, this must be taken seriously. And a director who's perhaps saying the trust board want reassurance that everything's okay. I think that could be a really good tool, that if it was a primary question that I've always asked, can you show me what's on your primary risk assessment? But I would encourage some sort of understanding and tolerance because it's new to trust. There will be a lot of them that don't have it out there, but it could be a good tool.
Excellent suggestion for taking forward there. That's what it's all about, to organise. So brilliant. Thanks, Nick. One thing I can say on the way through, actually, these questions will be noted. We will circulate them afterwards. And as an addition, if there's any we don't make, we'll put them out to the relevant persons and make sure they're circulated as well. So these ideas can be captured and shared with everyone across the spectrum, and then let's hope we can take something forward from that. Sorry, Mr. Horner, please.
Doug Horner from Coltrane Graph Science. If we could just focus on the threshold gap. During the COVID pandemic, the NHS asked us to develop an instrument to be able to detect gaps so that their isolation suites could remain airtight. So we have a commercially available instrument that will detect, measure in terms of size, and quantify in terms of air flow rate any gap through any fire door. So you could easily, not only just measure the threshold gap, but any gap, and it would take about 5 minutes. Would that help?
That certainly would help, yes. I mean, the British standard on gaps and airflow through them, I think, limits the amount of airflow to 3 cubic meters per hour.
That's right.
Per linear meter at 25 pascals pressure difference.
Yes, correct.
So if you can measure the gap around the outside of all doors, and then you can say, well, okay, we're within that tolerance, then really, in terms of smoke flow, that's pretty effective. In terms of the gaps for, and as I said earlier on, the gap, most fire doors are tested, as far as I'm aware anyway, to a tolerance of 10 millimetre gap at the bottom to in the burn stage, because we know heat rises and top fire doors typically fail towards the top rather, especially in a real fire situation, rather than the furnace they're subjected to. But yeah, that's very interesting, and it might.
It will measure any gap.
Yeah.
It's almost 48 years since I fought my last fire. I was serving in the army during the fireman strike, winter of 1977-78, and so I do have experience fighting fires in central London with pretty rudimentary equipment. And yes, you know, something that does stay in your mind for life is the amount of people that unfortunately one picked up with monoxide poisoning. And one of the things that we understood doing this work for the government during the pandemic was the very similar ways in which particulate matter and infection, viral airborne infection spread. We discovered obviously that the virus enveloped the particular matter. And so there are huge similarities between preventing the spread of infection and preventing the spread of carbon monoxide. The two are, go hand in hand. And it was effective. And with the help of the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, and a brilliant senior physicist, he discovered not only how to adapt. We had the technology, we've had it since 1987. It was used to stop ships from sinking. You'll find it on 12,000 ships worldwide. He adapted from fluid dynamics to air dynamics. Then he went further. He discovered the algorithms to quantify air loss. So we have a solution if you feel it will help.
Thank you.
I'll make sure that you're introduced. It's interesting. Thank you, Mr. Horner. You've got a great amount of knowledge, and that I recognise that. And interesting, he quoted 77. That was the year I was born, so I don't recall the violence. Right, so sorry. So I think this is all leading one way. I've slightly shift the focus of the questions now to Stephen. So from the architectural point of view, we've talked about the way the details of inspection and the way we manage that on site. Obviously, we recognise there's a huge pipeline. The government has a huge pipeline of spend coming up. I'm not going to get involved in the political discussion here. This is what I'm saying in positive and hopefulness. And of course, that's going to involve many new doors. So to deliver the compliance that we're talking about here and to make these inspections easier and quicker and to prevent so much of the damage that happens in these challenged healthcare environments, I'm going to move across to Stephen. There's a couple of questions that have come in from getting the specification right at the beginning kind of point of view right now. So, Stephen, I've got a couple of questions with permission. It sounds slightly governmental, but I'm going to take them both, give them both at once, then you can answer them. We'll take them where they will. So, first question: what factors do we need to consider when specifying door sets for a healthcare environment? Second one: how do we think the upcoming change in test standards, another key point, required by building regulations will impact upon specification? So, Stephen, that's over to you.
Thank you. I already touched on some of the things we need to consider when we're specifying doors, and I'm going to try not to labour those points and go back over them too much. But I think essentially we've got to try and understand from the outset what we want that door to do. In a healthcare environment, those doors perform a variety of functions, and there's a variety of stakeholders who have an interest in that door and what it's doing. Whether that be from as simple as how are we going to secure that door. If it is in a mental health environment, do we want that door to remain secure when the fire alarm goes off? Or if it's in an acute environment, do we want it to open? How actually do we achieve that? Is it a lock and key? How is that interface into the door? Is the recess, the cutout in that door of a size that's being tested within that door set? Or do we need to do something different? Or do we need to put an interconnected wrap around the lock case, for example? Or is it something that's applied to the face? So we need to think about the function of it. As I said earlier, we need to think about what protection that door is going to provide. Is it providing acoustic privacy, which is a type of protection? Is it providing X-ray protection, laser protection? Is it providing sufficient air tightness to keep infection in or infection out? And of course, fire as well. So thinking about fire in particular, obviously there is an impending change to the building regs, moving from BS 476, I think it is, onto the European standard. And it's been a bit of a funny situation because for years we've been able to have door sets that are tested to either standard. And we've seen a shift on other elements within the building where they've shifted away from the British standard and moved into the European standard. And that's highlighted that I think the European standard is generally slightly more stringent. And certainly with thinking about petitions, we've seen some petition systems that were previously certified to 30 minutes have disappeared, and some of the documentation has been withdrawn. And I think we'll probably see the same with doors. The challenge I think the industry has is that although we've got just under 5 years now to go until this change takes place or is enforced, that seems like a lifetime away, but actually it's going to come around very quickly. There's an awful lot of work to do within the industry to get that testing done to the new standard, not the new standard, but the new standard that's going to be mandated. And we know that fire test houses are in short supply. They're very busy. There's a lot of people. The focus is rightly on fire at the minute. There's a lot of people wanting to get different things tested. So we've got potentially a lot of work to do, haven't we, to get the products tested to make sure that we're ready to hit that date. And we've got no problems.
Yeah, that's an really interesting point, which I'm going to call on a colleague to fill this one in a second, but I'm sure we'll all be aware that the announcement, along with the announcement the same week as the second phase of the Grenfell report came out, the announcement about public buildings to have all doors to be tested standards by 2029. Might seem like a small announcement for us. That's a huge announcement as a manufacturer. Practically, it's massive. I think, look, I've done enough talking. Matt, I think you're going to cover an update from a manufacturer's point of view, how we are meeting EN testing, what it looks like for us, because it gives a whole new look, a whole new piece of work.
Yeah, so
Can you stand there? I'm going to break.
Matt Thankfully, I'm the commercial director for SDS. So we already started, and we were already starting the journey towards EN testing before the announcement was very, very quietly dropped on the Monday before the Grenfell report came out. We obviously recognise that specifiers particularly haven't got until 2029 to start specifying it's going to be pretty much from now in the case of some projects because of when they're likely to be delivered. There's only 6 months at the moment past the 29th of September 2029 deadline for build projects that are in progress to continue to install BS 476 doors instead of EN 1634. So
there's a huge amount of work to do. And I guess one of the questions I've got for the panel is, we often see the request for a particular name in terms of third-party certification, as you referred to third-party certification earlier. What's the panel's view on the fact that if everybody relies on BM Charter Q mark, no disrespect to that very well-respected organisation, that's going to put an enormous pressure on one testing house and one third-party body. So what's everybody's view on accessing alternative third-party certification? Stephen, what's your view first?
Yeah, I think everybody knows BM Charter Q mark, but the products are certified to another appropriately certified and substantiated testing or aligned to a testing house. I don't think there'd be a problem with that. And I think you make a very good point that it's going to be a significant challenge for one company to try and incorporate all those tests. I think it's probably going to be necessary, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we see average timescales from getting a test passed to actually receiving a completed FOA. It can be measured in years. You know, we've already carried out some tests and seen they absolutely are more stringent, which is fantastic. We're here to make sure we're promoting the very best in fire safety. So we applaud the fact that we need to work even harder in terms of what we produce. But again, that is going to mean that there's going to be more tests. It's not just a case of, well, we'll retest every product. It's what we'll retest every product and probably have to iterate. Fewer configurations are going to be covered. Global assessments, which we know many projects rely on at the moment, will become far less applicable to healthcare settings, which is going to put even more pressure on primary testing. I guess the challenge as well, which we need to consider, and if there are any thoughts or answers today, is that even if specifiers are accepting and adopting, that we need to start looking at alternatives to third-party certification or alternative names. How do we feed that through to the contractors so that they understand when they're actually out there trying to get quotations and procure the doors, that they have the leeway? What's the best way to make sure that that dialogue happens?
I think as with all of these things, it's ongoing dialogue. Really, it's communicating that alternatives are available and that the standards are the same. It's just a different name on the face of it, really.
And Maz, are there any thoughts on how NHSE can contribute to that conversation?
Well, there is already guidance in HTMO 502, which is on new hospitals or new build, which says that UCAS accreditation is the way to go. So whichever testing house you choose should be UCAS, that's the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, I believe, should be under the UCAS accreditation scheme, so that they will check that the standards that are being applied are appropriate. So if the UCAS, that's what the guidance says, and yeah, it's already in there. It's been around for a few years as well, that document.
I guess it's making sure that then filters through into early specifications, things like MBS specifications, so that you're choosing to put in consultation with the client actually has that level of leeway and pragmatism attached to it. And it's clear that this pragmatism is part of what's underpinning everything that's been put together in the Golden Thread document as well. Okay. Any other notes that you want to cover on the end?
Yes, great about the intent. There's many questions we have to take.
Anything online? Yeah.
Not specifically on EN, but a broader question around fire testing, in the fact that, so this is from Mark Aim, he basically asked, with the increase in healthcare building moving away from traditional construction methods, have there been testing of fire doors in modular stacked building structures? So it's more kind of is the implementation of the testing. I don't know if anyone's got any input to that particular question.
It's a good question, actually. But I think generally what we see with a modular building is that the way they are put together in terms of their internal partitions and the like don't really differ from what you would see in a traditional build. So actually you're placing a door into a stud partition or a flexible construction. So the tests generally will be comparable. I think there's a wider question about the testing of wall within those structures and how they move, or perhaps might move differently to how a concrete frame building would move. One of the things I was thinking about is that actually I've seen some manufacturers detailed in the modular world where where you would have a door set installed into an opening that isn't plasterboard lined, so you would essentially install a door frame up against the metal stud. Obviously, there'd be a gap for tolerance. Some of the manufacturers are lining those studs with plasterboard. Now, I can see the benefit in doing that in terms of protection of the modular building, but that might not be how that door set was tested initially. So I think that's one thing you've got to be a bit careful of, is making sure that what it says in the test certificate is how that door set is being installed. Hope that answers the question.
And then I guess that, thank you for that, because that ties in with a principle that we believe is super important, which is at the early stages of any new build construction project, as part of the supply chain, we should be having active discussions. So whether it's the modular contractor, whether it's if it's a more traditional build with the main contractor and the joinery subcontractors, the earlier we're all getting around the table to have discussion about what this project will look like as it's executed, the better, because as door experts we can answer those questions, but we're not necessarily partitioning experts. And so being able to have active discussions where the architect, contractor, subcontractors themselves are all around the table has to be one of the things that should become common practice. Any other questions on that, please?
Another comment really, rather than question, from Jason Sharp, has mentioned about, obviously with replacement doors in that environment, obviously there's an implication around testing here. So I wanted to bring this one up now. It said, it would be worth discussing door sets versus door assemblies, and obviously the knock-on effect that has around testing. So yeah, I wonder if anyone's got any comments or thoughts on that particular door.
I'll pick up on that one. Obviously, there's an overlap between a door set and a door assembly. They're one and the same, but when you talk of a door set, you're talking of all the components coming from one source. Typically, SDS would supply everything. They'd supply the frame, the leaf, the seals, the hardware. And when people are assembling them on site, there is a risk that people haven't got the expertise to ensure that everything is assembled with evidence of fire test evidence and also compatibility. So it's obvious to me, and it's obvious to various people in the industry, that you should go down the door set route. It was only at the last NARFO meeting in December that we found out that a London Trust fire safety advisor there had found out that their estates department had gone out and bought a door blank, and they were going to cut their own aperture in it and put some 30-minute glazing in it, and thinking that they were going to get a 30-minute door. Now, you know, I thought that sort of practice had stopped many years ago, but it's still happening. And the frustrating thing is that I'd been to that trust only the week before, delivered fire door training, and some of the people in their estates department said they were too busy to attend. So, you know, there is a massive issue, but there's a simple message here. You should go down the door set route if you're looking at critical buildings, critical repair, and you want guaranteed performance and compliance. Because if you're assembling a door from all different sources, you've got this golden thread of information. Someone should take responsibility for ensuring that they're reading it all and ensuring all the fire test evidence and the compatibility is going to deliver what was intended. And we all know that people don't have that expertise and don't even understand the concept of needing that expertise. So, you know, these reference documents, there's a massive need to educate people and get these people to understand these simple concepts, because we're talking of life safety buildings here and life safety components for the life safety building.
Couldn't agree more. You know, I think people probably know that we're more passionate about primary testing and also assembly. To underscore that, a few years ago we actually thought, right, let's test a door assembly. So we paid for the test out under the normal test conditions, or assembly rather than a door set. And under global assessments, that door set could have been supplied as a 60-minute rated door, because each of the components was 60-minute rated, and we configured it in line with the test evidence that was supplied for each component. That door lasted 44 minutes in a furnace. So 60 minutes of critical fire safety protection. If it's a 60-minute door, it's a high-risk area. it doesn't bear thinking about what that would mean if the people one side of that door had 16 minutes less protection than they thought they were going to get. And so, you know, that for us absolutely underscores the primary testing is the only way to go to be sure that the configurations are going to deliver. And again, there will be fewer configurations per test that will be permissible at the end. So it is a huge undertaking. Absolutely. But yes, it's essential. So.
Kind of linked to that, I think Alan touched on it. Is Mark Haynes asked about competencies in terms of what moving forward, what competencies will be needed by a healthcare fire risk assessor. I think that point you made about that example you gave around assembling a door and what requirements are. But I think just the general discussion on skill sets required going forward. I think
specific asking about fire risk assessors. I think that's a must.
We have got that in the CMA 503 Part K, so there is some reference in there which I won't go over now, but it looks quite likely that the government may mandate third-party UCAS accreditation for fire risk assessors at some time in the future. Having said that, I'm not entirely convinced that the level of competency required by some third-party accredited risk assessors would be sufficient to enable them to go and look at a door set and check it all and make sure it's to a suitable standard, and also decide on things like what's the gap between the frame and the wall in that existing? Do we need to pull some architrave off and have a look? So it's something that's in development. I can see that the need will increase for people to have a higher level of competency. Some third-party accredited schemes are out there for fire door maintenance already, fire door surveying and maintenance, which are, I was in one of those for a number of years, where I had a whole group of people working under me going around checking the fire doors. That level of competence may be, or that level of training may be what's required. But to be able to assess that door against the risk is the critical part again. Whereas the surveying schemes tend to be, well, these are the list of things, you go around and tick them all, and if it's compliant, it's compliant, and if it's not, then you need to do something about it to make it compliant. Whereas the reality of it may be that even if that door doesn't meet that particular compliance, it might be perfectly suitable in that location, and the risk might already be as low as reasonably practicable. And is it worth spending a sum of money on doing work to that door, which isn't going to make it any safer in the real world risk situation that it's going to be exposed to? And real fires are quite different, or can be quite different than test fires as well. I'm sure lots of people have seen photographs after a fire, and you tend to get the heat layer at a high level, and you normally get a smoke layer that comes down to a certain point. If you look at fire doors that have been damaged, they tend to be burnt a lot more at the top than they are at the bottom. Whereas the testing house procedures tend to be a more consistent heat flux across the whole of that door. So that's another side of it as well. What's the real life situation that that door is going to be exposed to? And the level of competence required to make those sorts of assessment is very high, rather than just go around and tick a box saying, yeah, the gap is between 2 and 4 mil, and it's got 3 hinges, and they're not, they're steel or brass. That's important as well, but if it's not, what if the gap at the bottom of that door, the bottom 300 mil on one side is 5 mil instead of a maximum of 4 mil? Is that really going to make any difference in a fire situation? And if the answer is no, how important is it to adjust that door so that the gap is 4 mil? Is it worth spending those resources on doors that really it would make a difference to? But it all depends on competence, and the person not only having the competence to do it, but having the confidence to put their name to it and say, in my opinion, this door, my professional opinion, this door doesn't quite tick all the boxes, but where it doesn't tick the boxes, the risk is relatively low. And you also need to consider how long is that door going to last for as well. I spent many years in the fire brigade, and the fire brigade don't stand outside the door saying, "Oh, we've got a 30-minute door. Well, let the fire burn for another 20 minutes, and then we'll go and put it out." They'll just open the door and go in. So as soon as the fire brigade turn up and open that door, it's done its job.
So, thank you. So I think one on the specification side of things, and door sets and assemblies actually, which is that one of the barriers or one of the challenges that is often faced when trying to commit to door sets rather than assemblies at design stage, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but is when you're trying to sync in existing, for example, access control arrangements in a hospital. And that can sometimes feel like it's preventing designers, specifiers committing to the very best standard of new product because it's not tying with what's on site in existing configurations, which is totally understandable. But if we're saying that potentially compromises the ultimate fire safety, what's the NHS's overall view on how we should prioritise maintaining consistent access control for a building, for example, versus the very best door set configurations? Stephen and Maz.
Yeah, I mean, obviously depends on what the access control system is, but generally there are alternatives, and there are alternatives that will communicate with and interface with existing systems. So I personally don't think you should be basing the entire specification of the door set on that system. I think you've got to consider everything that's important about that door, all those functions that it's going to provide. On top of that is fire. For me personally, fire safety's got to trump everything really.
I'm not going to talk about access. There's a point I'd like to make, which is an important point. I think as well as revising Part K, we revised HTMO 503 Part B, which is on fire alarm systems and false alarms, unwanted fire signals. One of the things I'm aware of is that a good example, not too far from here, Great Ormond Street Hospital had a fire back in 2008. And I've seen the video of it numerous times of the corridor where people are evacuating. And the corridor is free of smoke initially. And of course, the doors are closed because the fire alarm's gone off and the doors of the cross corridor doors are closed. And this is the point at which the staff are trying to evacuate the patients through those doors. So there are then people holding the doors open so that they can be evacuated fairly quickly. And then you see the point at which there's a cylinder that explodes in there and everything becomes full of smoke. There is a slight variation in that HTMO 503 Part B, which many people may not be aware of, which simply says that you can, if you consider it through, have the closing on the door of a specific door, not just on the fire alarm going off in that zone, but on specific detectors on either side of that door, so that whilst, if you think, one example I can think of, the hospital I worked in had a fracture clinic. There was only lots of rooms in there, but there was only one way onto the hospital street, which there shouldn't have been, but there was. So what's going to happen? The fire alarm goes off in that fracture clinic. First thing that's going to happen is that door's shut. And now you've got all those people with broken limbs trying to get through that door to get out, and yet the smoke hasn't got as far as that door. So the door's not really doing anything effective. So if you just said, well, on this particular door, we're going to only activate it on the detector on either side of that door. The drawback with that is that when someone comes along to test the doors, test the system, they'll set off the alarm in that area. And of course, those two detectors won't be set off. So they'll test it and they'll think, oh, the door's not closed, there's something wrong. So you just need to make sure that that's passed on to others. But that's in there now, so it does take a bit of thinking through. But we don't necessarily want people struggling to get through shut fire doors when there's no fire in the vicinity of that fire door.
Yeah, getting out is the most important thing there. Right?
Exactly.
Related question on that, specifically for Mark, actually, in terms of what's given the pressures at the moment in terms of bed space, corridor care has come up in terms of on escape routes, and what's your stance on that and how is that managed?
It's a tricky one, very topical at the moment. I mean, escape routes are escape routes. They're designed to be kept clear. What we would like to see as an enforcing authority is that consideration has been made to, as we've said before, a lot to lower your risks as much as you can. Fire risk assessments should be reviewed if there's any change in circumstances, such as having beds in corridors and stuff like that. Yeah, that's how we'd like to see it being managed at the moment. Again, with sort of lowering risks, we want to make sure that there's no oxygen cylinders being stored on those beds as well, because they're a high risk item. So stuff like that can be managed to lower the risk as much as possible. But it's not an ideal situation. The streets and corridors are designed to be emergency evacuation routes that should be kept clear.
I'll just come in on that. There was some guidance put out by NHS England just over 2 years ago. It was November 2 years and a bit ago. I can't remember the exact title of it. It had the catchy title of something like using areas of hospitals not generally used for patient care, something along those lines.
Temporary installation spaces of it.
Is that what we call it? Yeah. And the guidance is there, and it goes through the procedure which you need to follow if you're, for instance, if you've got a 4-bedded bay and you're putting an extra patient in there because of pressures and you need to put them somewhere, then you're increasing the capacity of that area. If you're using an area that wasn't previously used for patient care, now for patient care, and there is some specific guidance in there that needs to be followed, and it does include informing the local fire authority as well. And I won't go into the details of it, but it's on the NHS England website.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I think that's given a pretty good coverage. Now, I don't have any other questions out there, but I think it's probably to me to go, so please, I won't be finished. You get something quite happy to sit up with. But I think I would like to say, first of all, yeah, any more questions that I would like to ask now, online or please.
Yeah, just a point. I think most of what we spoke about today is all underpinned by life safety, and of course that takes priority. But when we're talking about I don't think we should get the importance, especially in the healthcare setting, of property protection, because as we've said, at the moment, there's not enough hospital space to go around and put people in normal beds. They're in corridors. So the last thing we'll need, having sorted out the life safety bit, evacuate the area, PHE, or whatever, is for that fire to spread and the effects of that fire to spread and take out a hospital or part of a hospital. Because if you can imagine that as we sit here today, where do we go? You know, so fire doors are absolutely critical to protection as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Lee. I'll just say there was a fire just over 2 years ago, I think, in the hospital in England, in which a fire was started by an oxygenist in an imaging department in the early hours of the morning, and smoke managed to get into some of those imaging rooms, and it meant that they couldn't use them then. They weren't usable because of smoke contamination, and simply having those doors and keeping them closed would have stopped that. So, it is effectively, although it's business continuity. Business continuity is life safety as well in the NHS, because if you can't run your business, you can't treat people, and their lives are at risk.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, I'm sorry, Alan, I actually have one here for you as well. So sorry, if you thought you'd got away with it. Sorry. Alan, you've been involved, your book, your inspection reference documents, which you've been producing for the past 5 years. Obviously, they've now been referenced in the HTMs. How much do you think they've actually had a practical effect? How much further do you think we've got to go?
That's a really good question. But before I answer you, Russell, can I say that you referred to them as my documents, and Maz refers to them as Alan's documents. Actually, there are other people in this room who contributed greatly, not least Maz, who has been very, very generous. And, you know, he created the matrix there about how to give guidance about threshold gap. So I'd just like to say that, because that's sort of partly answering your question. It's been a journey for me. I've learned an awful lot. I've called upon, expertise from a great deal of people. Mars in particular has been very generous with this time. Can I just say also regarding Mars that he's done a fantastic job on leading the changes to HTML 503 Part K, how to risk assess healthcare buildings. And he's taken this risk management, this practical, pragmatic approach. The previous HTML 503 Part K, one of the things it said is the fire compartmentation in healthcare buildings should be inspected annually. And I knew there wasn't a single trust I've spoken to who said they did it. Now, to me, if you've got HMs out there and nobody's got the resource or the time to do it, and then people say, well, actually, you don't need to do that because you should be risk managing your buildings. The whole thing was a nonsense. And Mars came out with a fantastic matrix, which goes into what we call RD2, the fire damp, fire stopping and cavity protection. And obviously, the sort of the elephant in the room for this document is compartment walls, which are essential, and the inspection of some compartment walls when they're more critical than others. And this matrix, as per as with threshold gaps and the frequency of inspecting fire doors, it's based on patient risk and patient dependency or independency, and also what is the likelihood that work will be carried out in those areas. And this matrix now says there are some walls, if you've got independent patients and there's a very low likelihood that there's been penetrations taking place, you don't have to inspect them for 10 years. Now that's a massive difference between you'll inspect it every year but nobody does it, and what this matrix says is focus on where you have got dependent patients and where there is a likelihood of a lot of work carried out, and focus on that. And we all know that hospitals got limited resources, so it's massively important that people are given really good guidance. And the work that Mars has done on these reference documents, and he's now reviewing all the HTMs, it's absolutely tremendous. I'd also like to thank Lee for his comment about the fact that these guides are NFCC approved, because I was only given 5 minutes and I did speak a little bit longer than that. But you're absolutely right. All of the documents are NFC approved. They also wrote forward to the book. They were very generous in peer reviewing the documents, as were the London Fire Brigade. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mark, because these documents were all created post-Grenfell, when we know that London Fire Brigade in particular were under tremendous pressure in terms of resource, and they've probably never been busier in the history of the brigade. And yet they were very, very generous with their time in reviewing these documents. And what's so fantastic about having done so, and massive peer review by a number of organisations, people such as Aviva Insurance, for example. It gives a great deal of credibility to these documents, but it also puts a practicality to these documents, and it also means that people can work together. It's a teamwork. If everyone's helping to write a document and peer review a document, it means that we're all sort of writing off the same hymn sheet. We're all understanding what are the really important bits. And one of the things that Mars has done with the matrix that I handed in, which just give that on, try and find the page now and see if I can find it again. But Mars created this matrix that went into the original document, and it's giving people guidance about threshold gaps, because people get really hot under the collar about threshold gaps. People say, well, it says in fire code, and it says in BS 9999, maximum threshold gap should be 3 millimetres. That might be really critical in some critical care units, depending on the location of the door. It might not matter whatsoever if you're talking of a ground floor training room that holds 20 people and everybody can get out in less than a minute. To what extent is that going to be a life safety critical issue if the threshold gap is 3 millimetre or 3.1 millimetre. And considering all the heat and the smoke rises, well, people are failing doors. People are failing doors saying this 20-year-old door has got hinges that are not CE marked. Well, we all know that CE marking only came in about 10 years ago. So to fail a door because the hinges aren't sealed, and to say this threshold gap is 3.1 millimetre, and it says in BS99, it's an absolute nonsense on some doors, but not other doors. And people like Lee and Nick and Nigel and Mars, they've provided this, and Jason, sorry, Jason, I nearly forgot you. They've provided this fantastic expertise that's gone into this document. So it's not Alan's book, it's a joint effort. You know, there's no I in T, but I understand this. Is there a me in T? I don't know. I'm not going there. But anyway, you know what I mean. I'm very pleased that people refer to these as Alan documents. I'm even more pleased, believe you me, that the HTMs are now referring to these documents. And they don't refer to them as Alan's document. Because it has been truly a joint effort. But now, we're still on this journey, Russell. We've still got to get it. It was the easiest thing, well, it wasn't the easiest thing to write a paper. It took more than 12 months. Then we converted it into reference documents. But now we've got to get it out there. What do they say about, you know, people have got AIDA, there's an acronym, isn't it, AIDA. You've got to make people aware that it exists, you've got to make them interested in it, you've got to have a desire to implement and use it, and then you've got to action it. You know, people are talking about this being a legacy, my legacy. I would argue it's the legacy of everybody. And I said, I'm not aware, I know there's some people in this room who've made tremendous efforts to comply with this document, and have also contributed. People like Nick Croydon and Jason Whittington, and who works also on a number of trusts. But it's a legacy of the people who are implementing it in the trusts. People have got to use this knowledge because it's very valuable. And as it says in the HTMs, if people are not using this guidance, because it's not mandatory, but if you're not using this guidance, what guidance are you using? And what are you doing to ensure that when these guys knock on your door, you can justify what you're doing? And what I'm seeing on an industrial scale is people are not getting it. They're not doing it well enough in hospitals. You know, I'm talking on general. Some are doing it really, really well. You know, Croydon, Whittington, they're battling against you know, issues that maybe go back donkey's years that they're having to deal with. But there's an awful lot of people out there who are, I think, are not understanding the need to put in some basic, really basic things in terms of life safety, in terms of treatment continuity. And these are duty holders. They've got a duty of care to ensure life safety in their buildings. And I know that it's really difficult. And I know that with the best will in the world, you can't always know what your estates department are doing, whether they're going off buying blanks, cutting their own and pretending they've got 30 minute doors. But if you're going to be really, really basic, I would say you want to be saying to people at high level, you've got to be implementing these three types of inspections. And also, if you're not even getting beyond that, you've got to be really selfish, and you've got to be protecting yourself, and you've got to be putting this stuff in writing. Because my company, Golden Thread Fibre, we're in third-party certification schemes because I'm retiring this year at the age of 70. I don't want to be in a witness box trying to explain at the age of 85 why we put some dodgy doors in a hospital. We're not going to do that, and that's why we're passionate about it. I know there's other people passionate in this room, and we're living in a selfish, litigious world, and I think everyone who's listening to this, you've got to get some basic stuff. If you haven't got three types of inspections in the trust, you've got to try and explain why. And it could well be that you have got you know, you have got things in place that will enable you to be compliant. I know there's an awful lot of trusts who are just not getting it for whatever reason. So that is frustrating about these reference documents, Russell. You know, 5 years later, it's been a real journey. But we've got an awful lot out of it, you know, and these are, I believe, going to make a big difference. I'm sorry if I went on a bit.
Absolutely not. I think you've kind of pretty much done a neat summary there, to be fair. I think your point about being a cross-sector specialist have worked together to put that document together, and now it's been adopted by the HTM. It's a leading document. And I know you've been quite pivotal in leading those persons, leads me on to my next point, is obviously we look back, things have changed, there's been iterations, and things looking forward, things will change again. It's probably why Alan's tried to try several times and never been able to. So, but we're well aware of that. And I think with that in mind, I think this kind of getting together is practical. It's the person on the ground, it's all of us together. It's the suppliers, it's the legislators, it's the polices working. I think we should be carrying on this discussion. I dare say, I'm not a betting man, but there will be some changes by this time next year, I have no doubt, in the world of fire safety and what's being issued. And we'd love to, I'm going to put the idea out that we might run this event again next year, so we can review back the, I don't know, Maz, that's something you'd be interested in. We'd certainly love to support it. As a manufacturer, we've taken this space in the past few months, and we have it for 2 years, and we have the option to take it on beyond that. I think where we're going with this is the industry right now, going back to the word collaboration, it's all about working together. And this space here is a brilliant space. We've hosted Architects for Health events. We actually have the Secretary of State for Health coming for a new hospital programme roundtable chat here later in the year. And we're really keen as a company to be there working together with all these parties, rather than selling to you, working with you to work out best solutions, best practices, challenges that come up, how do we embrace them? Do you know what? We'll make mistakes from the past, we'll learn from them, we'll move on. That's what happens. That's how we learn, that's how we progress, that's how we make things better. So if any individual hospital trust on the call today or in here in the room would like to book a time or start to come here with your team, really welcome it. You can see we actually have our doors around as well. I can never bring them to you, but you can come and see them here and you can use them the best I can do. But we're always really glad to host events. If anyone's got ideas, other helpful forums we could run, get other industry experts in, we're all up for that. We've got a programme, we're committed to doing something every month as a minimum. And again, we're working with IHE, we're working with Architects for Health, and we want to keep that going. So we're really glad to see that. It's a two-way discussion. We will circulate notes of today. We will circulate the questions that have come up, and any particular questions or contacts. If you contact us directly, we can certainly arrange for you to get in touch. But we would love to hear from you, hear your suggestions. We will ask that in a follow-up email as well. I think really and truthfully, that's kind of all from me. It's been a pleasure to have you all on behalf of SDS. It's been really good to have you, and I do appreciate that you've taken time out to come here. Some of you from quite far away as well. Of course, we do support. We really appreciate your ongoing. I can see several. We work with you closely in your hospitals as well, and we really want to do so and grow it. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our board. Thank you for your time. And there's heaps of food at the front. Do take a sandwich with a break. I think that's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
Can I just say a big thank you to Alan, who is retiring in June, I believe.
Definitely this
work has been absolutely invaluable over the past many years. And, you know, a couple of years ago, I said to him, oh, we need some testing done on different manufacturers' seals to see if they can be mixed and matched. And he said, oh, I'll do that. And he's done it within a very short space of time. And now it's in that HCMO 503 Part K as an appendix. So thank you, Alan, very much.
I said I knew a man who could do that. It was actually Sam who found £15,000 suits. And can I just tell you that next week, or was it this week, we're actually testing shaft walls, and that might go into the next edition of this document. And I'm currently reviewing the second edition of the original document. It's going to be RD1-3. And if anyone who's here today or joining us online would like to peer review this document in its draft stage, I would be very pleased for you to get on board and to be part of the legacy of delivering fire compliant buildings in healthcare.
If anyone wants Alan's details, please, by all means, if you're happy, we'll share them.
Absolutely.
And of course, Alan's document we've referred to this morning is available as well, so we can put you all in touch. And it's freely available. It's not a costed item, is it?
It's free of charge.
It's a classic example of how the industry can help itself. So yes, second go. Thank you very much, everyone. I do really appreciate it. It's good. And please, like I say, help yourselves, food, drinks. And if you're ever passing this way, you need a desk, give us a shout. Let's